Fugitive industrial emissions don't respect property lines. When toxic vapors drift from refining facilities into populated residential areas, the danger is immediate and invisible. In response to acute spikes, the federal government bypassed standard protocols to issue a 14-day emergency interim order under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. That emergency measure has now been formally extended for up to 2 years, enacting strict legal limits on the release of cancer-causing benzene. This intervention by the capital was triggered by an escalating health crisis in Ontario's Chemical Valley. The Aamjiwnaang First Nation sits directly adjacent to one of the densest concentrations of complex petrochemical refining infrastructure in the country. Residents there suffer direct physical impacts from drifting chemical vapors, experiencing severe headaches, nausea, and acute irritation of the eyes, nose, and throat. The regional industrial facilities operate under detailed provincial monitoring guidelines, yet emissions still reached critical emergency levels without triggering any prior regulatory shutdowns. To understand why federal emergency law was required, we must look at the flaw in how industry and regulators traditionally measure environmental compliance. This map shows dispersion modeling, the standard method to predict the long-term spatial distribution of pollutants. Notice the concentrated yellow hotspots, Zone 3 and Zone 4. These indicate elevated baseline benzene levels sitting directly over central Sarnia and the Aamjiwnaang Reserve boundary. This heat map accurately charts average annual exposure, but an annual average is a mathematical flattening of reality. A flat, compliant annual average line easily conceals the wildly fluctuating daily reality of physical operations, burying unexpected spills and flaring inside a long-term dataset. The standard models used by the Ministry of the Environment specifically fail to capture short-term, 1-hour, emission spikes. Benzene is a severe threat because of its dual nature. It is an acute respiratory toxicant in the short term and a cumulative carcinogen linked to leukemia over the long term. Sudden concentrated spikes of benzene bypass the safety of the baseline average. These spikes trigger acute medical symptoms and force states of emergency. Regulators can correct this blind spot by looking at the raw, empirical data gathered by physical property line monitoring stations. Relying solely on annual averages provides an illusion of compliance, blinding regulators to the high-frequency leaks actively harming the community. This spreadsheet is the 2025 OREG 419 Property Line Monitoring Dataset. It is the irrefutable empirical record of what is actually crossing the fence line. We can translate this raw data into a clear chronological timeline if we isolate a single boundary station, STN A301, and track it over the year. Through Q1 and Q2, baseline performance remains relatively stable, hovering between 10 and 20 micrograms per cubic meter. That stability fractures as the timeline crosses into Q3 during the summer months. The first major escalation occurs on July 23rd, where the concentration surges to 32.0 micrograms. The acceleration continues through August, hitting a peak of 39.0 micrograms on August 20th. There's a mechanical reason for this seasonal pattern. Warmer weather exacerbates the evaporation and off-gassing of volatile organic compounds from storage tanks and loading terminals. These spikes are not random anomalies. They represent a predictable, systemic failure in the facility's vapor recovery systems during summer operations. This summer off-gassing drifts directly over the Aamjiwnaang baseball diamond and surrounding residential zones. Empirical monitoring proves these facilities routinely operate well beyond safe thresholds during warmer months, contradicting the safety promised by long-term modeling. Beyond predictable seasonal surges, the monitoring data also captures sudden, catastrophic operational failures. Take a look at the data stream from station STN A2-01. Its baseline normally sits perfectly flat between 1 and 5 micrograms per cubic meter. On December 24th, that station records a massive anomaly, violently spiking to 72.0 micrograms. A spike this magnitude points to a major uncontained leak or system rupture. It delivers a highly concentrated dose of carcinogens to anyone immediately downwind. This concentration's in blue. Models fail to anticipate these peak hazards. Scientific reviews warn these extreme values introduce severe unknown variables into health risk assessments. The toxicological reality is severe. short-term exposure to a 72 microgram spike causes immediate acute respiratory distress, particularly in children and the elderly. Repeated acute spikes continually reset and elevate the community's overall cancer risk over decades, creating a devastating intergenerational health burden. These acute data anomalies are the exact regulatory breaches that forced the federal government to declare an emergency. The sheer scale of the petrochemical footprint surrounding the Sarnia community is massive and highly complex to regulate. Because physical boundary monitoring accurately logs the volatility in the air, regulators finally possess the irrefutable evidence required to bypass industry modeling and enforce penalties. This data directly links documented violations to specific companies like Imperial Oil. Imperial Oil was recently fined over $647,000 for a series of separate acute toxic leaks that sickened nearby residents. Following the severe benzene spikes that triggered the federal order, the Steinlelution facility was forced to announce a permanent shutdown by June 2026. Forcing the closure of heavy industrial infrastructure involves massive logistics and economic disruption, but it's necessary when community health is breached. The temporary SEPA order is a stopgap measure, providing immediate protection until the government can finalize permanent legislation. The data proves that voluntary compliance is insufficient, forcing the creation of permanent federal law. New permanent volatile organic compound regulations are expected by winter 2024 to 2025, strictly governing storage and loading nationwide. Protecting vulnerable communities requires abandoning the illusion of averages. It demands the rigorous, real-time empirical data required to hold polluters strictly accountable.